All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's episode of Physicians on Call, the Just One Thing for Health initiative of Hippocrates Docs. With us tonight, we have Dr. Susan Elizondo. She's in Austin, Texas, and is an optometrist in the area. She has discovered the connection between eye health and carotenoid-rich vegetables. So her challenge to us this week was to eat more carotenoid-rich vegetables to protect our eye health. So, Dr. Elizondo, please tell us about yourself. Tell us about your background.
So I was born and raised in Texas, and growing up, there was not a vegetable in sight. We ate rice and beans, and there's a little bit of cilantro, if you want to call the garnish a vegetable, in it. And I went to Texas A&M for undergrad and did a bachelor's in genetics there, and then I moved to Rochester, New York, and then to New York City after that for optometry school. And I actually started eating a little bit less meat when I was in New York because you had to walk to the grocery store and carry all your stuff back and things go bad. But then after that, I moved back to Texas because this is where my family is and my home is, and ended up in Austin. And I could have been voted the least likely to go plant-based. But I was walking around Town Lake, and I've always been a little bit more prone to put on weight easily. And I was walking around Town Lake with he was my boyfriend at my time, my husband now. And I had to go to the bathroom, and there is a lovely restaurant here called Casa de Luz that has public bathrooms outdoors. And it also happens to be an organic, vegan, gluten-free, oil-free, whole food, plant-based restaurant, which I didn't know at the time, but I felt guilty for using their bathroom. So we finished our walk, and we actually came back and ate dinner there. And it was the first time I had ever eaten at a place where I left the restaurant and I felt great. I felt light, and you didn't get that kind of heavy, gross feeling that you'll sometimes get after eating too much at a restaurant. And they have a lot of stuff up in the restaurant about kind of just being aware of what you're eating. And so it led me down the documentary rabbit hole of Forks Over Knives and just different documentaries in that vein. And that's when I started to realize, since I'm in healthcare, it's like, wow, a lot of these chronic diseases are reversible. And I'm in a position where I can actually talk to patients about this. But if this is something that, I feel it can solve the healthcare crisis in the country, if this is something that I'm going to talk to other people about and actually expect them to do, then I should probably actually do it first. Like, if it's so great, if I'm telling you to do it, why am I not doing it, right? So I switched over, and I believe it was, because it's been about 3 years now, so I believe it was 2015 in August where I switched over. And about 2 months after, and I was kind of transitioning in slowly, so all the oil wasn't gone, and once a week I'd still have eggs Benedict, so it wasn't perfect. But then I had my cholesterol checked just at an airport health fair because my husband's flight was delayed and I was bored, and they were doing it there in the airport, and they told me that my cholesterol was high. It was I think like 250 something. Wow. And I was like, no, I don't think you understand. I've been doing this plant-based thing for the past 2 months. Like, my cholesterol cannot be high. And so I got back, when I got back from my trip, I actually rechecked it, and it was high. So I was like, ooh. So so I started being a bit more strict about being plant-based, and trying to eliminate as much oil as possible, and kind of follow those guidelines of trying to eat whole food, plant-based as much as possible. And my cholesterol dropped like 20 or 30 points in about 2 months. and it's been kind of a slow progression, but it's actually finally down into the normal range. Because it scared me a little bit when that happened, because my dad at 60 had a triple heart bypass, and he's had 9 stents put in. My grandfather died of a heart attack at 50. So I felt like if I kept doing what I was doing, that I knew exactly what my future would be, and I didn't want to end up that way. And then, when you change your diet, you have more energy and you feel good. And it's even more incentive to tell other people. It's like, guess what? My cholesterol dropped. My feet don't stink. My headaches are gone. Like all these little things that, I thought were normal were just actually because of my diet. And I thought I was like super healthy, but I actually wasn't, even though at the time I wasn't aware that I had any health conditions when I originally decided to start. So now I do it essentially 100% like whole food, plant-based, no oil. And my husband, he's vegan and eats mostly whole food, plant-based. He does have some oil now and again, but it was originally an 11-month journey to get to 100%, but I'm kind of really happy when I'm there. And you were talking a little bit before about how, like, I can tell, even though I'm whole food, plant-based, like when you lean towards those less healthy things, like the vegan oil-free ice cream, you just don't feel as well as when you actually just eat your vegetables and what you really should be eating. So this is something that I promote to patients, but it's not something that I had the backing of the entire office. It's more like, oh, well, that's good. You're doing that. That's great. So I'm in negotiations now to kind of buy my own practice so that it can be a unified theme in the practice, and something that is kind of promoted a little bit more to make patients more aware when they come to see me, that this is kind of something that I'm an advocate of, and we can talk more in depth about.
All right. So that's interesting. I didn't realize that you discovered this so recently. I was thinking maybe it was a product of your school training, either in the genetics coursing that you did at A&M or even the optometry school in New York. But so did you learn anything about plant-based diet and the power for healing in either A&M or your optometry school?
No. No.
Wow.
So there's, very little, and kind of like in medical school, there's very little instruction on it. It's the same thing with like diabetics. They tell you, oh, don't eat too much fruit and watch your carbs, and kind of the same lines that medical students get. And that's actually often a difficulty I come across, because I see diabetic patients a lot. And it's kind of like, okay, you can eat fruit, but you have to eat it in the whole food form. You can eat carbohydrates, but we're not talking about refined carbohydrates. And it's kind of changing that paradigm, because I've had a patient that has come to me, and I believe he was diabetic and also had heart disease. And we started talking about a plant-based diet, but his cardiologist had told him that the worst possible thing he could eat would be a potato. So it's, I run into it less and less now than when I first started talking to people about it. I think it's kind of become more widely known that a plant-based diet will kind of help, is healthier for you, because there are more people that are actually doing it, and that makes the biggest difference. Because if your sister, like, oh, my sister's doing it, or my brother did it and he reversed his kidney disease, or it makes it a little bit easier because they know somebody else, and this just isn't some wild idea that you're presenting to them. This blow has been softened a little bit.
Right. So your husband came on board fairly easily after he saw what happened with you and your cholesterol? Did you find it was easy to transition him?
I think it was more of just because we were, we wanted to share everything with each other. So I would watch his comedy show, and then he would sit through Forks Over Knives, and I would watch you know, this slapstick comedy movie, and he sat through like Earthlings, and so we kind of traded off. And in the beginning, you know, sometimes if he would complain about certain things, you know, I try and be nice about it, but I tend to be a little bit of a blunt person, especially with people that are close to me. And so sometimes I'd be like, well, it's your own fault because you're, you know, you just had a weekend and stuffed your face with barbecue. Of course you don't feel well, you know. But he actually, after he transitioned over, I didn't realize it at the time until about 3 months later, because I always did the cooking when we were together, and he ate what I made. So
So what was the link then that tied the health benefits to you to the health benefits to your patients? What gave you the additional information about the carotenoid rich vegetables and their benefits for eye care?
So one of the big diseases out there now is macular degeneration, and there isn't really a very good treatment for it. So even on the American Academy of Ophthalmology website, you know, their main recommendations are dietary and lifestyle changes, and I'm very proud of them for literally saying, you know, reduce your saturated fat, and then having in parentheses next to it meat, dairy, butter, eggs, cheese. And the next one is like increase your carotenoid rich vegetables. Because there are actually a lot of studies out there that link carotenoid rich vegetables, or a lot of times they look at kind of the isolated vegetables in them, but it's a huge difference that it makes, where there's a study, and I think I mentioned it in the video, where if you have dark leafy greens 5 times or more a week compared to somebody that has them less than once a week, it reduces your macular degeneration risk by 86%, which is huge. And especially since for something like macular degeneration, there really is no good treatment right now. So what's it going to hurt to eat some leafy greens, you know,
Right.
and, you know, 5 times a week? You know,
Are your patients fairly open to the idea? Are they able to really give it a go?
Nowadays, most of them are. When I first started talking to patients about it, you know, there was actually quite a bit more pushback. But about 2 years ago, something shifted, and that really changed. And now when I talk to patients about it, they're usually like, oh, that's really interesting. Or, yeah, I know I should. Yeah, you know, I've been working on it. I'm trying to do it. So it's more, instead of like, oh, I don't want to do that, it's more like, I know I should be doing that, and I'm going to make an effort to try to do it.
Good. Do you see some benefits? I mean, are they just halting their disease progression, or are they actually able to reverse it in some cases?
Well, with things like diabetes, and the main eye complication there is diabetic retinopathy, I mean, you can completely reverse that. And there have been studies back since the 1950s, actually, that have shown you have this horrible looking picture of blood leakage all over the back of the eye. And then you come back 2 years later, and it looks like a totally new retina. It's completely gone. And I've had, you know, patients myself where they've been diabetic, they had blood spots in the back of their eye. And it's nice nowadays because we have the technology to take a picture and say, see that blood there? That shouldn't be there. You know, something is wrong, structurally wrong with your blood vessels. Blood is leaking out of them. That's not what should happen. And so they can actually see it. And then it's like, okay, I really need to do something about this. And in most patients that come in, you can always find some way, because somebody has a family member with glaucoma or with macular degeneration or with diabetes if they don't have it themselves. And everybody, if we live long enough, is going to get cataracts. It's just a matter of, it's all a gamble, right? Because if you get the disease and you're 95 and you pass away at 96, you know, not a big deal. But if you start to see signs of these diseases in your 50s and 60s, and you plan to have a bit of a longer lifespan, then that's when you really should kind of do something about it in order to save your vision. And I'll be frank with patients, and I'll tell them, I'm like, I think this is your best option. If you're not planning on sticking around, you really don't have to do anything about it, because it's not going to make a difference. But for most people, especially for cataracts, there's actually a study out of Europe called the Epic Oxford study, where they looked at about 27,000 non-diabetic individuals, and they found, and these were health conscious individuals, and they found that as you go from high meat eater to moderate to low to pescatarian to vegetarian to vegan, your cataract risk was reduced in a stepwise fashion until by the time you got down to vegan, it was about 40% less than if you were a high meat eater. And high meat eater was categorized as somebody that had more than a deck of card sized piece of meat a day. So it wasn't all that much.
Yeah, I love that. The statistics getting better and better and better. That's wonderful to hear. So the patients who do listen, are they feeling some benefit? I mean, do they tell you, in addition to maybe the test that shows whether or not they have the diabetic retinopathy still, do they feel different? Are they coming back to you telling you they feel better?
Yeah, the patients that actually do it 100% are very gung-ho, because a lot of times it's, it'll be a patient where I've tried to do this diet for my diabetes. I've tried to do this. I feel like I'm at the end of my rope. Everything is breaking. I just feel like almost depressed because they feel like their body is breaking down and everything is going with it. Now their eyes are going too. So the patients that do it are like super fans.
Good.
Yeah. They're like, life is better. I wouldn't go back. I feel amazing. I'm talking about it to like every Tom, Dick, and Harry I meet on the street.
So do they
They're
become testimonials for you too, since they're part of your practice?
they do kind of, when I give talks, I'll present them in there. But I don't own the practices that I work at.
That's right.
So yeah.
Right. Well, talk about your talks. That was one of my first exposures to you, is that I watched one of your presentations. It was really good. So talk about how you, the group that you are part of in Austin, and how you connect to giving these great presentations to the public.
So the group is ATX Alive, and there was a Plant Pure Nation documentary screening here in Austin. And they announced that there was a potluck, and Patty Fallow and Sarah Shannon and Linda Carney are the original organizers that formed the group. And I started going to their potlucks right after they started. I think I went to the second one that they ever had, and I would go, and I was moderately involved, and then I broke my ankle from a rock climbing accident. And so I had more time on my hands because I wasn't rock climbing anymore. And so I got more involved in ATX Alive and started organizing restaurant events, partly because I like to go out to eat. And one of the things that patients would say to me over and over again is like, okay, well, I'm never going to go out to eat again if I eat this way. So I'd go and talk to restaurants and ask them to put whole food, plant-based, or vegan, oil-free options on their menu. And so we have about 6 restaurants here in Austin that are Plant Pure certified, and we have a lot of others that, if then you can go there and get something that's oil-free, but they're not necessarily Plant Pure certified yet. So there are a lot of options in Austin. And we have a website, atxalive.com, where there are resources that have all of our events listed. And because not everybody is on Facebook, and that's originally where the group started. And so I find that the web page actually really helps to promote events. And then the flip side of it is, because you're having this event in a restaurant, then you go and you talk to the restaurant owner and the manager, and you explain to them what this diet is and why your group does it. And then they talk to their chefs and they talk to their servers. And so it gives a much broader reach just for the idea of a plant-based diet, just by going into a single restaurant. So
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
We have 3 here. We'd like to catch up with Austin. We've got some more work to do. We only have 3 here. Okay, so
Yeah.
talk about your presentations. Are those specifically through the ATX Alive group, or is that something you do with the optometry practice?
Those are just kind of through myself. I've given a couple of them through different groups through ATX Alive, and I've actually talked at Amazon and another vegan vegetarian group in town. And they originally started because one of the practices that I worked at, I was talking to patients about the benefits of dark leafy greens in reducing your risk of glaucoma, because there are a couple of studies out there that show that. And also, if you look at the underlying causes of glaucoma, it's essentially inflammation, oxidative stress, and poor vasculature, which is in part due to diet and lifestyle. So I had a boss that didn't believe me, and I wanted to do my own research to kind of counter that idea. And it's not something that I ever presented to her, but just to inform myself and make myself more knowledgeable on the topic. That's why I gave my first talk on glaucoma. And then, I did it subsequently for diabetes and macular degeneration. And when you're looking up stuff on one subject, you find information on different things that are eye related, like cataracts. But it was mainly because initially when I started talking to patients, I would talk about the bigger issues, like their systemic conditions like diabetes and high blood pressure and high cholesterol and things like that. And my boss kind of argued that it's not our place to talk to patients about their health. And I
Wow.
was like, well, if they're a diabetic, and they're seeing us because of their diabetes. And so that was kind of my journey to just validate why I was talking to these patients. And as I delved into it more, there was a much stronger link between all these eye diseases and diet and health than I ever thought.
Right.
So
Very interesting that even your colleague, that was one of my questions, is how do your colleagues feel about this connection? It's very interesting to hear that it came from a disbelief of the concept. So what
yeah.
inspires you then when others are not supporting you and patients don't always want to hear it? What inspires you to continue to give this information out?
Well, I think in the beginning, I started out being like, I'm going to tell everybody. And over time, I realized, there are some people that are not open to it and that are not quite ready to it yet. And so I'm going to pour my time and energy into people that show interest. So I was the president of the Optometric Society here in town last year. And one of my goals was to bring in plant-based doctors to talk to the society. And I brought in Dr. Linda Carney and Dr. Brooke Goldner. And I surprisingly got quite a bit of pushback actually from other optometrists that didn't want to hear about diet. They wanted to hear about corneal transplants or other fancy techniques. And it was like it was a lot of time and energy on my part to actually have it done. And so that's when I kind of shifted gears also and became more involved in ATX Alive, because here's a group that's already promoting it. Here are people that are already interested. And if anybody ever comes to me and wants to know more about things, then I will, go 100% and help them out. Because you never know who you're affecting. And I think, a lot of times it always seems that if I get discouraged about one thing, if one thing isn't going well, then all of a sudden something else wonderful happens. I got into a heated discussion with my father-in-law over dinner about veganism. But that same day, my mother-in-law, and they're not together, actually said that she was going to try going plant-based. So
You never
you
know.
know?
That is so true. Well, that's
Yeah.
good. So do you have, so I'm supposing that everything you're eating at home is 100% plant-based. Do you have
hmm
favorite recipe sites? Do you have favorite resources you like to use when you're preparing food for yourself?
I do. My husband likes to try lots of different things, and I'm more like I could eat the same thing every day and I would be okay. Recently, we've actually been using a meal delivery service called Lettuce. They have vegan meals that are they're organic and they're locally sourced. And they sometimes have oil, but they put the ingredients on beforehand so you can kind of look to see what next week's delivery list is. And I'm like, oh, if I can't use the tortillas, then I'll just get my own tortillas to use. Or if I can't use something, I'll modify it and just, leave that part out. Because usually it's a very small portion of it. Um, and so I just kind of modify it to my needs. But I do have this. I do really like to do a unblended salad, as I like to call it, for
Mhm.
breakfast. Which it sounds strange, but it tastes really good. It's like a smoothie, just not blended. So it's like I'll put my leafy greens and then grapes or raisins and ripened bananas, cut them up in there with oranges, and I'll just eat my greens and my fruit, and it's great. And I take it into work sometimes in the morning because I never finish my breakfast before I get there. And at first it was a little odd, but people get used to things. Like they're
Uh-huh.
like, oh, there's Dr. Elizondo and her big salad like, that she's eating for breakfast in the morning.
Well,
Um,
that's
I went I went through an oatmeal phase where I really liked oatmeal, and because I'm Mexican, I like to do a lot of rice and beans, so Spanish rice and pinto beans. And Mexican recipes are really easily adapted to be plant-based, and do that with just my favorite thing to do is just a pot of vegetables with I start with onions and garlic. That's in everything I
mine.
make, and do potatoes and usually broccoli and tomato and cilantro and season with garlic powder, onion powder, and cumin. Um, and so that's it's usually my go-to when I can just make a pot and it's only me eating it for the week. So
Sounds delicious.
yeah.
How do you help your patients kind of make that first transition? Do you offer up resource information? Like, do you tell them to watch the documentaries that you enjoy? Do you tell them about the books that you've read? Or how would you lead someone in the very beginning?
So usually it depends on what their condition is, because if they have a high cholesterol problem, I feel like I can really relate to them and I talk to them about my personal story a bit. If it's a diabetic, then we talk about diabetes, and I usually recommend Dr. Neil Bernard's Prevent and Reverse Diabetes. If it's kind of cholesterol and heart issues, I'll recommend Dr. Esselstyn's book Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. And in general, I like to recommend How Not to Die by Dr. Greger, because it's just a comprehensive manual and it's broken down chapter by chapter so they can kind of look up based on their diseases. And if, but not everybody loves to read books. And so I also always recommend The Healthiest Diet on the Planet by Dr. McDougall, because it's a super quick half-day read. It has a picture book in it. So if you don't like reading, you can get through it super quick. And then I usually recommend Forks Over Knives and What the Health, and I'll guide them to our ATX Alive page, because then they'll see there are other people in the community and there's a support group, and they can find the local restaurants that they can go to. And I'll always let them know of the ATX Alive event that's coming up most recently. And I usually go to most of them. So I let them know, hey, if you go, I'll be there. Just come over and say hi. If you're shy about things, I'll introduce you to people. So don't worry about it. Um, but it really depends. I try with every person to see what you always want to connect with them. What is it that drives them? What is it that's going to make them most likely to want to stick to this diet? And so usually it ends up being a little bit of a longer conversation, because you need to have that interaction and find out what are they really concerned about. What is it, you know, maybe they're big on the environment actually, and that's partly going to be what drives them. So I try and make it as person specific as I can, because I find usually if I have a long conversation with them, then next year when they come back, they're going to be like, oh yeah, we talked about it, and I did this, this, and this, and they tell you exactly what changes they made in their diet and lifestyle.
It's very rewarding, isn't it, to know that you might have impacted someone's life in that way?
Yeah. Definitely. And there was a weekend where I was going to a potluck up in Rattan Creek. It's just north of here. And Adam Sudd lives in the area, and he was actually giving a talk there on addiction, and my aunt and uncle happened to be in town. So I was like, hey, do you want to come with me? And they were like, okay, we'll go. So I made 3 potluck dishes. And then we headed up, and I just thought, oh, you know, they're humoring me. They're so nice because they want to spend time with me. And my aunt has, at the time, I didn't realize it, but she was on 4 high blood pressure medications, and they were trying to add a 5th, but they couldn't because of the side effects. And she was also on metformin and was having a lot of other health issues. And so she decided after going to that talk that she was going to switch over. And even though she doesn't do plant-based 100% now, she's off her blood pressure medication. She's off her diabetes medication. She can walk for a lot longer than she used to be. It used to be a bit of a challenge just to walk a few steps without pain. So now she can walk like 10, 15 minutes.
Wow, that's wonderful. So Adam's talk was the signing of the deal for her.
It was. And so it's nice because those things always come along where there's, you know, nice change. There's always something that if you get discouraged, like it actually does work. It actually reverses disease. You just have to do it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
So would you say that the movies are a good way for the new people? If like you said, not everyone enjoys reading, but the movies are really a great way to start the process.
Yeah. And I think YouTube is great too. There's a couple called That Vegan Couple that they talk a lot about health and have videos up there that are on the health aspect of eating a whole food, plant-based, no oil diet. So it's a good resource because there are just so many different whole food plant-based YouTubers out there.
There are a lot of options.
Are
there favorite recipe sites that you use?
I like Brand New Vegan, and there's Plant Powered Kitchen by Adrena Burton, who she spurred it because I used to bake a ton, and then I stopped baking when I went plant-based because I just didn't know how. It was like, how am I going to do baking that's vegan, that's gluten-free, that's oil-free? Like, I don't want to deal with it. But I got married in March, and I wanted to have dessert at my wedding, and I couldn't find anybody that made a cupcake to my satisfaction. And I found her recipe, Adrena Burton's on Plant Powered Kitchen, for her chocolate cake. It's a sweet potato chocolate cake, and it was amazing. And I just tweaked it a little bit to make it gluten-free. And so I used that as kind of the recipe as my wedding. And I also played with some others. I like Vegan 8, also because those are usually simple recipes. And McDougall.com also has some. He has an app too that you can download onto your phone, and so you can have recipes on the go. And Forks Over Knives, I have their app also. I really like to cook, so.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. So the Forks Over Knives app I really like because you can download the grocery lists, and you can categorize it by recipe and pick out ingredients that way in the store, or it'll categorize it by where it is in the store and do that as well. So it's really
the Forks Over Knives app, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And for people that say, oh, I don't have a lot of time, there's so many resources. There's Meal Mentor, also known as Happy Herbivore, where you can pay for a subscription. It's like $19 a month, and she'll give you all recipes that are vegan, oil-free, and she goes on the lower calorie density side of things, and those are pretty good. There's also Dirty Girl Clean Food, which is a recipe planning website where you can do a subscription, and they'll, give you a grocery list and tell you how to prep for the week as well.
There's so many great options out there, aren't there?
Yeah, they're never ending. So anytime somebody
Right.
throws an excuse, I'm like, well, you could do this.
There's so
This
many
is an
options.
option.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, do you have favorites veggies that you would recommend to your friends, to your patients, to your family? And then Maureen has a question for us too. But knowing that the carotenoid-rich vegetables are the best for eye health, even with that knowledge, do you have favorites that you recommend that people should always try to get?
Well, I always tell them, because everybody is going to have something they really like or they don't like. So usually when I say carotenoid rich vegetables, it's, anything yellow, orange, red, or dark leafy green. And they're like, oh, well, can I eat bell peppers? Can I eat this? And I was like, whatever you will eat is the best one.
Good advice. Good advice.
Yeah.
Maureen's question is, which are the most beneficial carotenoid-rich leafy greens?
So the ones that they have done the actual studies on are kale, spinach, and collard greens. I'm fairly certain when they've actually broken it down and looked at it, I'm fairly certain that the other dark leafy greens would be pretty similar, but those were the specific ones that they looked at in the studies. And for glaucoma, when they did those studies, there's one that looked at the collard greens and kale in particular and found that you get a huge reduction in risk. If you have it, I believe it was just one serving a month, reduces your risk. But there is another study that shows it's nitrate rich vegetables. So not only the dark leafy greens, but things also like beets and beet juice were counted in it. And they found that those made a huge difference also. And they think it's because, again, so glaucoma is a disease where the pressure in the eye is so high that it kills off the nerve fiber in the back of the eye. And one of the ways that it does that is that pressure is cutting, or they theorize one of the ways is because that pressure is cutting off part of the blood supply to the optic nerve head, which is like the cable that takes the signal that you've seen light back to your brain. And that can only happen if that vasculature is not as robust as what it should be. And so one of the reasons they think that these dark leafy greens and nitrates are so beneficial is because they are beneficial to the endothelial lining of those blood vessels, which is partly what helps keep those blood vessels healthy over time.
So I read something about arugula, the bitter greens, having a little bit more concentration of the nitrates. Did I read that correctly? Is that what you would mention too?
Yeah, I think they have one of the highest concentrations. I think on nutritionfacts.com, he has, and it was a slide that I actually almost put for the video. He has kind of the nitrate rich vegetables and has them kind of listed out. And arugula is up there towards the top.
It's my favorite.
Good.
Yes, I love arugula. Well, do you think there's a benefit to raw versus cooked, or are we safe just eating all of them?
I think you're safe eating all of them because, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but usually when they do these studies and they see these big benefits, it's not a ton of servings. It's like 2 to 3 servings a week. I think it's just much more than what the standard American diet is. So every little bit helps. And when they do the studies, they haven't really broken it down between dark leafy greens or raw. From personally, I would think probably raw would be a little bit more beneficial, or having a higher raw content in your diet. But if you hate raw vegetables and the only way that you're going to eat them is if they're cooked, then cook your vegetables.
Right. The best one to have is the one you'll eat. Absolutely.
Yeah. But just from personal experience, I know that when I have gone raw, like I do feel really, really good. But I've only managed to do it for a week at a time when I have.
I
really like cooked food.
Yeah, I like cooked food too, and I do like some raw. But I did listen. You mentioned Brooke Goldner just a little bit ago, and it's funny. I hope that we're going to be able to have her as a featured doc as well. And I listened to her podcast with Howard Jacobson, and that is earth moving. What she has lived through, and how she's now, helping her patients. And leafy greens are her big secret. To better health. You mentioned that you like your salad, your not processed salad, that she does the blender full of greens every morning. It's a wonderful concept. And even though you're talking about it for eye health, it affects every other part of the body as well. The whole body's covered with veins, right?
Yeah. And that's oftentimes what I'll do. I'll tell patients, because they'll ask, what can I do to keep my eyes healthy? And I'm like, well, they're attached to the rest of your body. So whatever you do to keep your whole body healthy keeps your eyes healthy. Because there are so many conditions: lupus, arthritis, diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. People don't think about it, but they all have eye complications that you can have with them. So if you get rid of the systemic disease, you get rid of the possibility of the eye complications.
Very interesting. I hadn't put those two together yet.
Yeah. It's like high blood pressure, higher risk for stroke in the back of the eye. High cholesterol, you can throw off a plaque and again have stroke in the back of the eye. For lupus, the typical medication for it can have visual side effects. So if you don't have lupus and you don't have to take the medication, like you won't have the visual side effects. Most of the autoimmune diseases have dry eye consequences, just because dry eye, the underlying cause is chronic inflammation on the front of the eye. And a lot of times it's not only the autoimmune disease itself, but it's the medication that the patient is on for the autoimmune disease. Or like for people that have high blood pressure, often they're on a diuretic, which dries you out. Or for people that have chronic allergies, they're on an antihistamine, which again dries your eyes out. And so all of these medications have consequences.
Absolutely. Very interesting. I hadn't tied those together yet either. So the patients who come to you, they're just thinking they're coming in for a regular exam, maybe, but they have some active disease. Do you try to make them aware of that connection that you've just explained it all beautifully?
So usually I'll ask them just to get a gauge of kind of where they are. Has anybody ever told you that diabetes is reversible, that high blood pressure is reversible, that high cholesterol is reversible? And a lot of times they'll say no, or maybe, and then that is kind of the opening into it, where you can kind of go in and talk about it a little bit more in depth. And usually even if there is absolutely nothing going on, most people have allergies out there, and there are studies that show that the higher number of fruits and vegetables you have per day, they dampen your allergy symptoms. And also with cataracts, if everybody will get them if you live long enough. So I tell everybody to wear their UV protection. I tell them about that Epic Oxford study. And then there's also a study that shows that those with higher vitamin C intake from fruits and vegetables reduce their cataract risk. And that's only if it comes from fruits and vegetables. If it comes from a pill, it actually has no effect.
Interesting. Well, G, a member of our audience would like to ask you a question. G, turn your microphone on and feel free to talk to Dr. Elizondo.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, so I enjoy pumpkin puree, and
Mm-hmm.
from what I can tell, it's one of the highest foods in vitamin A on a
Mm-hmm.
what's a percentage basis. I guess this is per serving. It's like
Mm-hmm.
380%.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I imagine that's of the daily recommended amount uh,
Mm-hmm.
by the FDA. So, um, are there benefits of, say, going above 100% of the daily FDA, or maybe the plant-based thought leaders don't believe as much in? Maybe they believe in certain minimums, but going higher, um, the more the better. Perhaps, I'm not sure.
Right. So with vitamin A is an interesting one in particular because that is one that is fat soluble and so can be stored in your body. Generally, if you get it from a fruit or vegetable or natural form, you don't have to be concerned about it.
True. Yes.
If
Yeah.
you're getting it from a vitamin form, there is a worry that you
Sure.
actually can overdose on vitamin A. And you can get vitamin A toxicity. But most people, if you're getting it from fruits and vegetables and things like that, it's not really an issue. And as far as is it, so can you get more than the recommended daily value? Admittedly, sometimes I'm like 400% over
Okay. Sure.
in a lot of those values.
Sure.
Um, so I don't know that they have actually looked at like how much more, because when they're doing these studies, they have a population of people and they ask them to eat a certain amount. And, usually the higher end of that amount is going to be on a 5 to 7 serving range, which I think most of us that are plant-based will probably get far more than that in a single day.
Okay. Thank you. And if I may ask a quick follow-up,
Mm-hmm.
in excuse me, in a in a related to this general subject of carotenoids, I noticed I believe it was a Plant-Based Science London video
Mm-hmm.
where Dr. Neil Bernard was excerpted in, and he was talking about the benefits of carrots daily.
Mm-hmm.
And as I recall, his main thrust on that, his comments in that video were that I think he was talking about having 2 carrots a day, something like that, but
Mm-hmm.
that the I guess the vitamins, the nutrients in carrots in particular help cells to prevent, say, I thought he said perhaps cancer cells from being attacked. So these nutrients on in the carrots somehow surround cells and help to boost immunity. Have you seen that video, perhaps, or are you able to comment on that at all?
I haven't seen that video, but in general, when they do these studies with the carotenoid-rich vegetables in the back of the eye, one of the reasons they think they're so effective is that these carotenoids they're pigments and they act as antioxidants in the back of the eye. And they think they're reducing the amount of oxidative stress and they're reducing the inflammation that's in the area. And that's partly what is reducing the disease incidence. And so I wouldn't be surprised that some of those properties that drive down oxidative stress and inflammation make it less likely for cancer to proliferate as well.
Yeah, I think there is, definitely a tie-in with the oxidative nature or preventing oxidation, so free
Yeah.
radicals, etc. So thank you very much for your
Yeah.
comments and for
No
your
problem.
presentation tonight.
No problem. And that actually reminds me, because I think it's very popular and you probably see them all over the grocery store, those macular degeneration supplements, AREDS and AREDS 2. So the original AREDS formula, they did a study, I believe it was back in the 2000s, and they found that if you put, I believe it was A, C, E, and zinc and copper, and the original formulation had beta carotene in it in a pill, that if you were a very advanced form of macular degeneration, what they call stage 3 of the dry form. So you've already been diagnosed, you're already noticing some visual changes, but you're not to the more visually devastating form, which is called wet macular degeneration, where essentially your blood vessels leak fluid and blood and protein and everything to the back of your eye that affects your vision. If you're in that stage, that late stage of macular degeneration, for the dry form, you're 25% less likely to move on to that wet form. And that's what those macular degeneration supplements were testing. And they found out that some beta carotene, even though it's this carotenoid and it's amazing, when you strip it out and you put it in a pill form as just a large amount of beta carotene, it actually increases your lung cancer risk in smokers and former smokers. And so they did a second study called AREDS2, where they switched out the beta carotene with lutein and zeaxanthine. They also changed a few other things because they had really high amounts of zinc and and stuff in there that could potentially cause problems, and you can really be on it long term, and you're supposed to be on these supplements long term. So they did AREDS2, and they found, again, if you're in that late stage of macular degeneration, that's where they tested, it does reduce you progressing on to a more devastating form. And so I think the misconception that's out there is generally that if you take these supplements, and they go by all different names, OcuHealth, Preservision, MacuHealth, that if you're, a lot of people think, oh, my parent has macular degeneration, I don't have it yet, I'm going to start on the supplement because I'm going to prevent myself from getting it. But they don't realize that they never tested in that group of people, and that being on this long term and the doses that they have in those pills have been separately, when they looked at that dosage of vitamin E, it kind of increased men's risk for prostate cancer, increased possible risk for cardiovascular events. For lutein, it's possible if you're on it long term, it can increase your risk for some cancers. So there are other side effects. And generally, when patients ask about those, I always try to make sure that they know that these are for a specific group of patients. And even then, I always recommend get it from your carotenoid-rich vegetables, because they're going to be rich in everything that is in those supplements, and they're going to give it to you in a better way. So.
Excellent advice. I do have one more question for you too. What about electronics, the blue light? What would you advise parents, small children, or even parents who have a lot of screen time?
So one of the things, aside from the blue light, is just anytime you look at a screen, it's usually closer in. And whenever we look at something up close, there's actually a focusing system in our eye that has to kick in. We do what's called, the term for it's accommodation. And so a lot of times what will happen is if you're working up close and you're doing a lot of work, it's not that hard to hold your arm up for like a minute. But a lot of people are on a screen all day long for hours and hours and hours. And so if you're holding that arm up for 8 hours, it's going to cause eye fatigue and eye strain. And oftentimes that's manifested as like an aching in the eyes, or when you look away from the screen and you look up in the distance, you'll notice that your vision is blurry because that focusing system is having a hard time transitioning because it's so tired. So generally recommend, if you're on the computer, every 20 minutes, look away 20 feet in the distance for about 20 seconds, and that gives your eye a break. And then as far as the blue light goes, you can put blue light filters on glasses that will block specific wavelengths. The blue light is important for your circadian rhythm, and you'll get it in sunlight when you go outside as well. The studies that have been done on blue light have been done on in vitro high intensity. So they haven't actually been done in humans, and they've been done at a much higher intensity than what we would have emitted from our screens in normal devices. So long term, we still don't know, but it does tend to make people more comfortable to put the blue light filter just as far as eye strain goes on their glasses. But whether that low level of blue light emission is damaging long term to the back of the eye. Unfortunately, computer screens haven't been around long enough to really tell.
The data. So it's a focusing issue. It's not necessarily the blue light. I'm trying to coach my daughter through her, she complains about having blurry vision, and she's on her phone all the time. So that's why and she's young. She's 19. So that's why I was asking about children specifically.
Yeah, and a lot of times, you know, kids will come in. There was this rainbow loom craze that went around like a year or two ago, and I had 5-year-olds coming in with eye strain. And I was like,
wow.
Why do you have eye strain? I was like, oh, she's been rainbow looming like nonstop, apparently. But the other general rule to be aware of when you're looking at anything up close is most kids will hold things way too close. They'll do it right in front of their face. Generally, you want things to be as far away as if you made a fist with your hand and put it under your chin, like as far away as your elbow. Because the closer you hold something, the harder your eyes have to work. And so you'll be more likely to get eye strain sooner. Interesting.
Well, thank you for that explanation. That's great. And G, thanks you again. I don't have the first name. Sorry about that. But he thanks you again for answering the questions and giving the presentation. So we're nearing a 1 hour mark, and I know your time is very valuable. You're probably ready to get to see your husband again. Do you have some parting words for us on things we should be doing, things we should be helping others do? Protect our eyes.
Before you do that, is it possible I could ask a question really quickly?
I'm so sorry, Lynn. Please forgive me.
That's okay. That's okay. I do have a couple of questions. First one is, you mentioned ATX Alive. Is that something that's local to your area? Is it something that is local in various areas around the country?
So we're the local chapter of Plant Pure Nation. We just named our group ATX Alive. So, but yeah, we're part of, and which is actually helpful when you go into restaurants, because then you can be like, oh, I'm part of a nationwide organization.
Yeah. Okay. And my next question is, have you heard any resistance or pushback or questions as it relates to, you know, looking at the green leafy vegetables and the romaine lettuce E. coli episode that we're undergoing right now, and all the romaine being called back or recalled? Anything popped up as far as people's concerns about leafy green vegetables?
They haven't really. I mean, I think, you know, usually if you're going to make like smoothies or things like that, romaine isn't really the lettuce of choice for most of those. So I think that's probably why it hasn't been too big of a thing. I personally don't eat romaine a whole lot either. I think the thing I've majorly noticed is, like, I guess because there's no romaine, people are buying all the stuff that I usually buy. And my lettuce is gone now. But I haven't really heard too much pushback about that.
Okay.
And usually if I have patients that are resistant to eating vegetables, that they're never resistant to a green smoothie. So, which is courtesy of Brooke Goldner. Actually, that idea was from her.
Great. Well, so I'll put it this way. Challenging eyesight is something that has been prevalent in my family. And then, you know, wearing glasses for distance, I'm often looking at glasses, and the number of people that actually wear glasses, there are a lot of people. And so I've often thought, is there a way to do something naturally that actually will reclaim your eyesight to 20/20 vision?
There's, you know, there are a few things you can do, but going all the way back to 20/20, it depends on what your vision is now. If you're somebody who's highly myopic and like a -7, you're not getting back to 0. There are some studies that show that if kids get an hour of sunlight a day, they're less likely to progress as far as their nearsightedness goes. And, one of the reasons that they think people are nearsighted, or one of the theories that it's out there, is that we spend so much time nowadays on our computer and looking at things up close, and they think it may be a natural adaptation. So we're staring at something up close all day, and as we're growing, our eyes change. So now when you look at something up close, if you're nearsighted, you actually don't have to work to see it. But then we put glasses on top of that, and there you go, you're doing the work again. I do typically find that with patients that are nearsighted, as they get close to 40, that their prescriptions do tend to get a little bit better. Sometimes they actually go all the way back to zero if they didn't have that much of a prescription to begin with. And that's from a couple of factors. One is just the natural changes that happen in our eye from UV exposure over time to that front surface and to the lens in our eye actually can make us a little bit less nearsighted over time. Another one I think is a lot of people out there wear contact lenses, and a lot of people don't practice the best contact lens habits. So if you abuse or overwear your contacts, one of the things that happens is that the front of your eye swells, which makes you a little bit more nearsighted. So I've actually had it where I've had patients that they were incredibly uncomfortable in their contact lenses, and I actually switched them over to a daily lens and had them wear their contacts less, and their prescription changed. Their prescription got significantly better, and this isn't because the structural length of their eyeball changed. This is because we took care of the swelling and the irritation that was going on the front of their eye. But I actually searched for any kind of diet studies to try and find that link, changing prescription and diet, and I couldn't find any. But the hope is that if you practice good habits when you're young, that hopefully that will translate into a little bit less of a prescription. There are also some recent promising studies on using what are called multifocal contact lenses in kids. So essentially the way the contact lens works is it's a lens that has different powers in it, and it gives extra power for when you look at things up close, so the eye doesn't have to work as hard. And they think that that's possibly why it slows their myopia progression or slows their progression of nearsightedness. But those are the only ones that I know of so far.
Good information. Thank you.
Definitely good information. Well, Lynn, any further questions for Dr. Elizondo?
No, that exhausted my short list. Thank you, Lisa.
Okay.
Your questions were fabulous.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the other members of our audience who chimed in and asked some questions too. Dr. Elizondo, do you have any parting words of wisdom for tonight?
I think the only thing I would say is, wear your UV protection when you go outside and eat your carotenoid-rich vegetables. So anything yellow, orange, red, dark leafy green reduces your risk of macular degeneration, of glaucoma, you name it. If you eat your vegetables, it reduces your risk.
Wonderful. That's good for everything. Well, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed your information and your bubbly attitude, and I wish you the best in your practice. Oh, there's one more question. It says, can I ask one more? Absolutely, G. Ask away.
Thank you. I guess my mic's on, I guess.
Yes.
Thank you. I know, like Dr. Greger talks about the value of certain enzymes in broccoli and, say, Brussels sprouts, some other cruciferous vegetables. And so it's better to not cook those, or if you do cook those, perhaps use some mustard seed on the cooked product to revive the enzyme. Does anything bad happen? Like, as I understand it, your beta carotene is actually enriched when you cook carrots, like steaming them, or and not overdoing it. Hopefully there's still a little crunch or firmness to the vegetable, but like cooking pumpkin puree or squash or carrots, etc. As far as I understand it, from what I've read, that is good because it enriches the concentration of beta carotene. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, and like you said, when we're talking about, it's like gently cooking, because if you boil it, you're not
Sure.
you're kind of killing the nutrients in it. I know for tomatoes, it increases the nutrients for, in particular for eye health. For what they found is kind of more. They found raw carrots are actually a little bit more effective than cooked carrots, just when they looked at like disease reduction for macular degeneration in particular. But if you're eating a whole plethora of vegetables, it's probably not going to make a huge difference as long as you're not just cooking those vegetables down.
Okay. Okay, good to know. I always want the most advantageous preparation method. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, well, I guess that wraps this episode up. Thank you so much, Dr. Elizondo, for joining us tonight.
Thank you. It was great to be here. I'm really appreciative that y'all had me, and hope y'all have a good night.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks.
Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week on the next episode of Physicians on Call.
Good night.